All right, everyone, welcome. Again, my name is Jason Casado of Enlight Software. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar entitled Transforming IT Delivery Through Better Data Center Service Management. We will be talking about how to find out how companies are using DCSM to coordinate with the broader enterprise management ecosystem, such as ITSM, ERP, and ITAM. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat box on your screen, and we will answer them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and be made available to you within 72 hours. Now I'd like to hand it over to Mark Gatos, the CMO of Enlight Software. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you. So first, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today and spending some time. And I'd like to introduce, we have a guest speaker today, which is really super. We have Jennifer Cook of IDC, who is joining us. She's a 22-year veteran of IDC. And as Jason mentioned, my name is Mark Gatos. I'm Chief Marketing Officer here over at Enlight. So a few things before we get started. We'll try and keep the pace pretty quick here on this webinar, but additionally, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them. We'll certainly try to get to all the questions at the end of the webinar, but if there are some that come up during the webinar and we feel we can stick them in, we'll try and get to them during the actual presentation. So keep that in mind. Again, questions are great. It helps mix it up. It helps, keep us on our toes, right? It helps Jennifer and Mark keep their brains going, right? So if you have any questions, please do submit them. And second, I'd like to say, if you happen to be at AFCOM next week in Las Vegas, at the big, I think it's Data Center World, if you happen to be there, please drop by the Enlight booth. We're going to have some great swag. We're going to have boogie bots. Come meet the team, very friendly folks. But we're at booth 519 at AFCOM. Please drop by and say hello, and you can see a demonstration of our products in action. We just recently acquired a great solution to FieldView Solutions, which has real-time monitoring and alarming. So we're actually going to be demonstrating that as well as the traditional Enlight data center service management solution. So again, if you happen to be at AFCOM in Vegas next week, please drop by. We've got a boogie bot with your name on it. So without further ado, I'd actually like to turn it over to Jennifer Cook, who will be sort of starting our presentation.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. And I'm happy to be here today to share some new and fresh IDC data and some experiences of data center managers and CIOs that I've been talking to recently on the importance of shifting to a services-driven IT model and how this shift, this key shift, impacts data center and IT professionals. And we're at a turning point, and I'm going to say honestly, perhaps a little bit past a turning point, where IT as a service is a competitive differentiator. But not everyone is prepared or able to operate in this on-demand world. And so today, to get prepared and to drive better, more measurable service, we need to take control over our data center resources. This often requires investment in solutions and software to drive that better management, more specifically, better data center service management, or DCSM, to make this transition to a new world of unprecedented scale, speed, and scope. I'm going to share some customer experiences with you and tell you some ways that I was surprised by the unintended consequences of better management. When we implement tools and software, we're often enamored by the technology or the process, but what I found were some profound improvements in the people aspect. And when I say the people aspect, one of those foundational elements, the people, process, technology elements that are integral to any successful endeavor. So I'll be sharing those experiences with you. And finally, we'll wrap up with some essential guidance that was gathered by interviewing many IT and data center professionals who are in the midst of a digital transformation at their company right now. And based on these discussions with people in the trenches doing this every day and what they've learned, IDC and Enlight have come up with some practical advice to share with you that may help you on your own journey. So to dive right in, if we could go to the next slide. Data center agility and performance pressure is accelerating. We hear this time and time again, the number of devices, the amount of data being collected, but in any of our surveys that we do, first, at the top of the list, important initiatives for IT in the data center is speeding up deployment times. Internal and external customers have no bandwidth or patience for waiting for infrastructure to be set up, tested, and workloads deployed. We live in an on-demand world, and to remain relevant, the ability to be agile, deliver IT resources whenever and wherever needed in a very short period of time, this is a competitive differentiator. Second, to accomplish this and provide services that are more and more becoming dependent on big data, the ability to leverage third-party data centers is the only way really to require a level of agility. Data gravity is that force that's creating more reliance on major cloud-based services as the collectors and distributors of this data, as well as service providers who can provide that global reach and connectivity required for an on-demand world. Third, operating in this on-demand IT as a service world means a mindset shift. So instead of thinking of our data centers as the beginning and end of IT projects, we instead need to think of all the various flavors of IT, on-premise, off-premise, private, public cloud, as service, etc., all as resources that can be leveraged as needed. And it requires shifting our mindset from our owned resources to viewing IT as pools of resources and having the ability to leverage the right resources to meet the needs of the end customer. And this is an important shift. It's not done easily. And today, almost all enterprise IT organizations really lack the skills and visibility into their own resources to make the best decisions for the company. And this is where the work needs to be done, to have the ability to look across a menu of IT options and based on cost, level of service, security, impact on the business to make the best decisions on when and where computing should be done. Fourth, finally, a shift to thinking of the role of the IT manager or CIO as one of delivering resources, not one of managing devices. Leveraging solutions and changing processes to be able to see the role of IT as an orchestrator of resources, not one that's mired in the tedious process of manually managing infrastructure. So if we could switch to the next slide, what is IT as a service? It's kind of a buzzword that we've all heard, but we wanted to define it in the context of how we're thinking about it today. But building on this idea about the role of IT and how it's evolving comes this emerging goal, really, of delivering IT as a service. Similar to how during the Industrial Revolution, the generation of electricity to power machinery became a utility. The ability to create and distribute power wasn't really central to the business anymore. It became a capability that's important yet outsourced. This shift is going on right now and has some serious implications for enterprise IT organizations. To remain relevant and core to your business, IT needs to be run like a business, delivering services for all lines of business within that organization. As with any business, the model needs to be evaluated against many other choices and options, including outsized resources such as service providers. The goal of IT should be tightly aligned with the goals of the business, with emphasis on customer needs and outcomes and innovation. And a few of the outcomes of delivering IT as a service are increased financial transparency, increased operational efficiency, the ability to make comparisons across that menu of compute resources. These are all key and central to running IT as a business. But this doesn't happen all on its own. It requires investment in a new way of running the IT as a business and running that IT business. And for that reason, we need better management of data center resources, and that's where DCSM comes in. So if we could switch to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what is DCSM. So data center service management, what that acronym stands for, is more than data center infrastructure management, or DCIM. It depends on DCIM, but takes that capability and leverages the data to be much more actionable and useful. It's the integration of the power of DCIM where all the real-time monitoring, management, and capacity planning happens, and combining it with the power of IT service management, or ITSM capabilities, which manages the process of change and ensures the integrity and accuracy of data. And as any data center manager knows, it's a very dynamic and fast-moving environment that can get out of control very quickly. So at IDC, we believe that DCSM is an essential capability of delivering IT as a service. because it enables a full visibility and control over physical and virtual resources across the many available to an IT organization. And with that, this is includes information about DCSM by Nlight. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Gato so he can share with you some specifics on Nlight's offering.
Yeah, so the term data center service management sort of emerged out of data center infrastructure management. So if we go back to about a decade ago or about 12 years ago, Nlight was one of the first companies to provide a modern software solution to manage infrastructure, and this was called data center infrastructure management. If you think about it, I think many of you out there are probably familiar with DSIM. DSIM is about managing infrastructure, right? It's about managing assets and the resources that those assets use, power and cooling and racks and servers and all the physical stuff. Well, the natural evolution is to manage the entire service the data center is providing. And so data center service management is defined as, of course, the core and the base of data center service management of DCSM is DSIM, right? It's managing the infrastructure. But then you have a variety of processes and workflow that's going on also. And lastly, you want to tie this information into ITSM. And what you end up having is an ability to manage the entire service that's being delivered in the data center. So let me give you a couple examples. So imagine there's some sort of power issue occurring in the data center floor. That can be fed into a workflow that then kicks off a process to basically fix it or to make changes to the data center floor that is then automatically synchronized into ITSM, for instance, so that the CMDB is aware of those changes, but you can automatically kick off the workflow to solve that particular issue. In a sort of reverse form, imagine companies rolling out a new application and you want to put in 5 new racks of servers. They would put that into the change management process. It would go through the natural change management process, sort of above DCSM. But then when the actual servers and racks would then approve, that would then be punched into DCSM, into Nlight. And at that point, we would kick off the workflows, reserve space, reserve the resources for those particular assets. When they arrive, they would be scanned in, and automatically a punch list would be generated to tell personnel where those assets are going, how they need to be cabled, and how they need to be powered up in place. And that information is then recorded and fed back up into ITSM. So you create a closed loop on the entire service, right? And the whole idea here is to make it more efficient, make it repeatable, and you're really trying to automate and make sort of repetitious or a consistent sort of way you do things and consistent policies. That way you can sort of begin to follow the standard ITIL processes, set up a repeatable process, measure it, and improve it. So the overall benefits, right, as Jennifer is talking about, is by doing this, you then sort of tie into IT as a service. You begin to make the data center as a service, which is obviously a subset of IT as a service. So this is really what Nlight does. We have one of the leading DSIM solutions in the world, but we have absolutely the leading data center service management solution in the world. So that's what we define as data center service management, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jennifer.
Okay, great. So this slide is a little bit of an eye chart, but it helps me get my thoughts around the requirements for IT as a service and really how DCSM delivers the critical capabilities required for this transition to IT service delivery. So if you kind of look at, on the left-hand side, what you need to deliver IT as a service, run IT like a business. You need to have metrics on all the different options for your data center resources. You need improved financial transparency, increased operational efficiency, like I said, the ability to compare across that menu of choices. And really what's very important is linking that back and being central to the business is really that reliance and the emphasis on customer needs and outcomes. because that's where innovation happens, and that's where you become very important, and the data center proves its value to the rest of the organization, is being that delivering great service to the customers. So if you look over on the right-hand side, what does DCSM do for you? Number one, it enables those viewbacks and chargebacks, which are essential, to make the best decisions and to allocate the resources. And you end up seeing reduced costs through using your resources a little bit better. On the metrics of, where's the best place to put workloads. DCSM delivers that ability to gather all that data. You can also have a central place to look at your security and risk options to make those decisions. So it's helping you power your decisions on the best placement of resources by increasing the transparency, increasing that visibility into your resources. Increased operational efficiency is accomplished through that tighter integration with ITSM. So that's really the core of DCSM, is that linkage of DCIM and ITSM, supporting the workflow of the people and process, and just improving and making more efficient all the many changes that happen within the data center. And again, the menu, ability to compare all options. DCSM delivers the complete costs and time requirements for your own on-premise data center, and that way you can make a comparison with the other options that are available to you. And finally, again, that emphasis on customer needs and outcomes. What you will see is better performance and speeding up the deployment times, which is number one on everyone's list. And so this is kind of a good chart if you're trying to convince others in your group, what may be the benefits, and kind of going through how this may affect them. This is kind of a good chart used for that. And up to this point, you may be agreeing with me on some of these things. Yeah, these seem like great principles and concept for shifting to IT as a service. But what I'm going to show you next is some survey data that I think will surprise you. I think it's going to up the urgency because it comes in the form of the impact of line of business managers who, I'm going to characterize them kind of tongue-in-cheek, a little bit armed and dangerous with credit cards. So Mark, if we could shift to the next slide. This is the money slide. This should be your aha moment. IDC did some research on how technology projects are funded, and we wanted to know who the stakeholders were, who held the purse string, so to speak, in projects that included IT resources or the data center. And what we found was pretty surprising. If you look at this data counterclockwise, you'll see that in technology projects, only 19% are funded by IT only, on the left-hand side there. 20% are joint projects. But if you add up the projects that the business units fund, it adds up to 61%, more than half. This 61% of funding is coming from business units as opposed to IT, and the shift away from kind of a traditional IT model has the potential really to de-emphasize the importance of IT organizations, forcing CIOs to transform their role and become a driver of innovation to deliver IT as a service. And this should really be a wake-up call to anyone on the IT side who's on the fence about whether they need to transform, because this kind of shocking numbers on how your role is going to change. The world, it's already moved. You're already kind of behind the gun if you haven't begun some sort of a transformation and how you deliver service to your end user, customers, internal or external. And kind of going along with that, if we could go to the next slide on how the role of the CIO is changing. So it speaks to a little bit of the broader topic, but in a separate survey, we asked a group of CEOs to share their thoughts on what they wanted their CIO to be. And the results are as follows. The majority wanted their CIO to be an innovator. Earlier in the webinar, I mentioned how IT needs to shift away from managing devices and instead focus on delivering resources. And this survey data really confirms that this is what business leaders want too. The percentage of CEOs that want their CIO to be operational, that's down at the bottom, that less than 10%, it's much smaller. of what, if you're on the IT side or if you're a CIO, that, this is what your boss wants you to be. You should kind of follow that. From what this survey data says, the IT and the CIO role really needs to change to shift to deliver IT as a service. IT's job has changed. It's about delivering resources, but to do that will require an investment in creation of smarter data centers, those that can ingest data and communicate with the rest of the ecosystem. And it requires an investment in tools, an investment in changing your own internal processes to deliver that better IT service. And it often doesn't happen on its own. Shifting to the next slide, we'll talk about inefficiency.
Actually, Jennifer, somebody had a question. What size companies was the survey taken from?
This survey was taken from companies that we excluded very small companies. So I believe it was 1,000 employees on up in this survey. And it was mainly North American based, but many of the CEOs, the companies were multinational companies, but based in the US, if that puts that in a little context for you.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. All right, and so this is from another survey here talking about, we looked at the last about how business leaders want their CIO to be an innovator. But what's really tough here is if you look at that little piece of the pie that's at the top in orange, only 20%, 21% of a data center manager's time really can be used for innovation and new projects. So, we're at a crossroads where, your boss wants you to be innovative, but yet you can only carve out 20%, 21% of your time to do that. So it's kind of, it's tough. Like, we want to be able to use IT for competitive advantage, but right now, IT doesn't have enough time to innovate. They're too busy doing mundane tasks to really focus on what the business needs, which is innovation. So with only 21% of an IT professional's time spent on new projects, that's a tough thing. The 80% is spent on, keeping the lights on, updating, patches, troubleshooting. IT really needs some help in order to transform and be what is asked of them. And we still have ongoing problems in the data center. I'll show you, the next slide shows what we're seeing as far as issues. This was, again, basically North American based. This is a mix of IT managers and facility managers in one survey. And I'll explain in a moment why I did not sort these in ascending or descending order. But we asked the IT and facilities managers, what problems have you experienced in the past 12 months? And here's the results. It's a combination of problems that can be controlled and those that cannot be controlled. Like, for example, downtime due to natural disasters. We haven't figured out how to change the weather yet. So that number is just going to change according to, what happens weather-wise or just, things that can't be controlled. But similar to previous years, downtime, human error ranks right up near the top. Those are things that can be controlled. But moving on to the next slide, what I want to highlight here is taking a little bit of a different view because this is sorted by the amount of equipment in a data center. So why I wanted to show you the other one first is so that you can see that data centers that have 1,000 or more servers are in light blue. In the dark blue, which is what we saw in the previous slide, that was all respondents. The results here are a real eye-opener because they highlight the fact that more equipment in the data center directly translate into more serious problems. The good news is that data centers with a lot of equipment, they appear to be better at the human error factor. Looking at the data over the past 3 years, that's actually come down, and I'm going to attribute that to more companies implementing better asset management processes, perhaps investing in DCIM. But what's troubling here is that the security and the regulatory and compliance issues are serious, and they're, they can have a very negative impact on the business, and they're also very high on this scale.
Hey, Jennifer, right there. what type of regulatory and compliance issues are you sort of referring to, and what sort of security breaches? Can you sort of elucidate on both of those?
Okay, so in this survey, it was a web survey, so we didn't ask them specifically what they were. So it could be a very wide net. When I talk to people, regulatory or compliance issues, it's actually very shocking. It can be that, we don't know where this server is that has some very critical data, and we can't find it. Just problems that you think are very rudimentary, we probably would have solved by now, but when it comes down to it, there is just widespread, continued widespread mismanagement of resources. And security breaches, that's a difficult and complex problem every day, but it's a combination of, of many different types. So that, I think, it's kind of a broad brush in here and left open to respondents. But I can tell you from talking to people in what happens in the real world, it is shocking. The amount of, we know how things are supposed to be done, but as we saw in previous slides, there's not enough time. And, a lot of people have been outsourced. You're trying to do all those tasks with fewer people, and things slip through the cracks. It's many organizations don't have the help that they need technology-wise. They don't have the support that they need to do things the way that they know they need to be done.
Okay, great.
Okay. I guess kind of the good news, when we look at this slide, it's really scary. A lot of bad things are happening. But the good news is, I think, that there's issues here that can be addressed with better management of infrastructure or by implementing DCSM processes and tools within the organization. So moving on the next slide, this is taken from the same survey. We asked the same respondents, who are a mix of IT managers and facility managers, we asked them what their top initiatives were. We actually asked them to pick 3, and then we took the aggregated results here of the 3. Like I mentioned earlier, speeding time to deploy IT services is very top of mind, it's very important, as was improving workflow and availability of resources and asset management. What's a little bit surprising is reducing power consumption is important, but it's a little bit lower on the chart than we would think. About 37% of respondents ranked this initiative as one of their top 3. I think that's surprising because I do cover the data center infrastructure management, which looks into the power and cooling envelope, and as you can see, cooling is pretty low here too, ranked lowest at about 13%. And those are usually like the top calling cards. But what it shows to me is that these things are all really important, but it's the stuff that has to do with management and speeding time to deploy that are really most important. It's the things that have to do with workflow and the things that DCSM directly covers that are more pressing issues today. If we can move on to the next slide, the top data center initiative. So this is looking at that same survey data, but again, kind of the good news here is that everything in green are initiatives that are tied to the ITSM, DCIM, and DCSM functions. These are the things that are within your purview and within your control by implementing the right processes and tools to get things done. And this is why I believe it's important to invest. It will drive, better IT service delivery, and will directly address the top data center initiatives that are, consistent year after year that we see. So, moving on to the next slide, why do we need best practices in data center management? In one of the questions earlier, what are those problems? And I'm surprised every day by kind of the lack of management, and I kind of call that the roulette style of management, taking a lot of chances. And it's really more common than we think. A lot of people don't want to admit it, but I do talk to a lot of people every day where too much is left to chance. The majority of data centers are data breaches waiting to happen because they don't know what they have, they don't know where it is, and they don't know how it's connected. And so that's why the end-to-end link from the physical world to the virtual world and resources is a requirement. It's an essential step that cannot be skipped or ignored. It may take some work, but it's the first step in the process of better management. Audits and compliance requirements will become more and more stringent. This is an important point. It's where a lot of people are falling down right now. Larger data centers, those that have more equipment, are having more problems. And with the demands for more controls on data privacy and security, regulations enacted to protect consumers, accountability is really key. We interviewed a large financial services firm that was able to gain significant time savings in their audits. Before implementing DCSM, which coincidentally it was from Enlight, they would spend 80 to 100 hours to perform an audit. Now they can get that same information in 1 hour. It's not only the time savings, which equals money, it's the ability to perform an audit and not be too surprised with the results. Most IT organizations find that they have 25 to 30% more equipment than they thought in an audit. It's a very important aspect of any project is the people and process support. And by coordinating and empowering your users through advanced workflow support, you're improving the quality of the data and the efficiency of the many changes that occur in the data center. And that's why I think it's so important to coordinate your infrastructure management with your workflow management, or your DCIM with ITSM to enable that, the better service management. And a lot of what I've told you now is what I think, but what are real customers saying? On the next slide, I have a couple of quotes here. And when I talk to end users who've gone through a transformation with the goal of creating a service-driven IT model, what they tell me is interesting. Many have talked about the energy savings. They kind of go through some of the check boxes of why they made the investment in the first place. They like the peace of mind in knowing that they can perform an audit with a high degree of accuracy. But that's not the part that really excites them. One large telecom provider was able to achieve a massive dollar savings by rationalizing and right-sizing their maintenance agreements. And that's not something that we hear about very often. The effort and investment they made in DCSM was returned many times over in the dollar savings they achieved through reduced spending on maintenance agreements. It's just an unintended consequence of better management, and it made this manager look very good to his superiors. Another conversation I had was equally positive, although for a different reason. On the topic of faster delivery of service, this data center manager at a large financial services firm talked about how many times they were given a directive, like, you're going to have this equipment showing up on your dock tomorrow, and you better be prepared to get it up and running as soon as possible. It was a, you need to do this for me, and not too much conversation going there. And it was not only difficult logistically, making sure there's enough power at the rack or that the additional load wouldn't disrupt the environmental conditions, it contributed to a general sense of disrespect. Like, if this person had more notice, he could have prepared better. And his entire team felt frustrated and undervalued. After implementing DCSM, the whole process changed. He was given more lead time when projects were coming his way. He could prepare, provide input, and generally improve the whole process. And on top of that, his team was more satisfied because they were able to work proactively. They felt part of being a larger team. They weren't being catered to, but they were considered and valued. They were a happier team. And that's, it's kind of like a feel-good thing. Everybody wants to feel good about their job. But I do think it's very important. As we have fewer people doing the same job, you might as well be happy, and you might as well have people that are dedicated and feel like they're working towards a common goal. So this is something that, you can't, it's more difficult to quantify dollar savings, but I personally think it's extremely important. And moving on to the next slide, getting to the predictable, measurable, cost-effective service delivery. When you look across that landscape and menu of choices, cloud service providers such as AWS, Azure, they've raised the bar and reset expectations on the granular detail they're able to obtain on the costs associated with delivering IT services. And IT organizations, enterprise or IT organizations, are often struggling with the ability to provide that same level understanding with their own data center cost. And delivering IT as a service and orchestrating the many resources available requires developing a predictable, accountable IT service, and it requires a new and improved way of managing infrastructure. So, we'll kind of close out this discussion and open it up for Q&A, but what management needs to do really is to encompass several facets, including the physical equipment in the data center, along with how it supports the virtual infrastructure. And this can be accomplished through better management. This improved management needs to direct the people and the workflow to maintain accuracy and integrity while improving the efficiency of the dynamic data center. And most data centers go through thousands of changes a year, and tracking these changes manually is difficult, and it often lacks accuracy. And finally, management needs to extend all the way across the enterprise and coordinate it with a broader ecosystem of IT service management, enterprise resource planning, and asset management. So how do we accomplish this? I'm going to wrap up with some essential guidance, based on the next slide, based on conversations with IT organizations who are well along in this journey of delivering IT as a service. IDC recommends establishing DCSM as the common language to accomplish shared goals. We talked a little bit about having those shared goals improves the people aspect and everyone's satisfaction. And, initially, there may be some internal pushback. Other people may have their own management tools that they don't want to give up. And for this reason, I think it's really important to invest in an open solution that promotes collaboration. It's also important to start with focused, measurable goals in a limited setting. Learn from your mistakes and then do a broader rollout. Know and plan for your internal silos and struggles. I can't emphasize this enough. I have a lot of conversations about this, but these types of projects can turn into a real power play. And so I advise planning the strategy wisely, and maybe remember that you can get farther with a carrot than you can with a stick. Investing in smarter technologies that ensure the integrity of data. This includes solutions that gather data to perform tasks automatically. The mantra being work smarter and not harder, especially given that, like we saw in the survey data, you only have 20% of your time for innovation. So you have to do a better job with that limited time that you have. A solution that helps with workflow will increase the chances of success. That shift from reactive to proactive management with analytics and improved workflow processes. Really keep in mind how a proactive management improves morale. Again, that people aspect. And finally, measuring DCSM progress against the business goals. I really think that IT goals need to be much more closely aligned with the business goals to remain relevant. And the key to being agile is responding to these business needs, not the IT needs, keeping in mind the larger enterprise goal and how your DCSM initiatives support them. And so those are kind of our initial recommendations. IDC has done a white paper that Nlight has that will lay out in greater detail some of the things that you may want to do if you're considering taking a step on this journey. And with that, I think I will hand it back over to Mark.
Hey, thank you, Jennifer. So, and we'll include, as Jason had mentioned earlier, we will send out the recording of the webinar back to everyone, but we'll also include a link to that IDC white paper if you'd like to read it. And a couple other things before we get to the questions, and please feel free to submit some more questions. We've actually had quite a few come in, so we'll get to those in just a second. We did want to mention there is now a new Data Center Service Management for Dummies book out there. A lot of people love to read the Dummies books. And so if you go to the Nlight website, again, you can download the DCSM for Dummies book if you'd like to learn more. And I'd like to reemphasize to everybody, if you're going to be in AppCom Las Vegas next week, please drop by the Nlight booth at booth 519. That's 519. Please drop by, and we have a boogie bot. I have to say that properly. We have a boogie bot with your name. If you don't know what a boogie bot is, drop by and you can definitely see them in action. So let's get to the questions. So Jennifer, the first question we have here is, our organization is siloed. How can we use just one tool? What's the path?
Okay. Yeah, and this is I get that a lot from people who have very good intentions, but the way their organization is set up, you have again, the word of legacy, you have a legacy of how things have always been managed. You have somebody in the network space who, their goal is to protect that turf and to make sure the network, which can often be very delicate, runs properly, because they're going to get in trouble if it doesn't. It's going to look bad for them. They have very pure motives to protect that turf. You have other people that are responsible for more of the critical facilities, and they might have their own tools that they've been using for a very long time. These are the people that roll their eyes with IoT because they say, we've been gathering all this data forever. Why do I need something new? Why do I need something disruptive? And I think in these cases, it becomes out of the purview and out of the experience of a lot of people who are trying to drive change. But I think the more that you can emphasize these shared goals of, how can we all work better together? And, a first step, and I think where a lot of people have maybe made a mistake is, well, you know what, we have this one tool and everybody's just going to have to come and use this one tool. And there's been a lot of resistance to that because people don't like change. I don't like change. Nobody does. You have something that works and you want to stick with it. So I think the key, and those people who I've talked to have been successful, have taken a little bit more of a collaborative approach. Like, look, we know you're in love with doing things your own way, but let's try to integrate, and so we all have a single version of the truth. And for that reason, because you want people to be able to use their own tools but yet have a shared tool, and ultimately it would be great if everyone could just use that shared tool, but it's a process. That's why it's really critical to have a tool that is open and enables integrations. You don't want a closed system that can't talk to other systems. You want something that's very open and welcoming of data, because that is how these projects are going to go further. You want to get all the data in one place so you can have that complete visibility. And essential to doing that is not only a tool that can take the data, but having everyone on board with it and everyone using it, so that you have the most accurate, the most actionable data possible.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So we've had a few people ask about data center service management for dummies. We've put a link into the chat, so if you want to go directly to that, to DCSM for Dummies, we put it in the chat for anybody that wants to get to it. So we have a question, and I think it's regarding the slide you had on the benefits that those particular Inlight customers had, which was, did Inlight customers evaluate savings by CapEx or by OpEx?
Yep. So that's, CapEx has become like the new dirty word. I think that the goal is to look at things more from an ongoing operational expense aspect, and so that is where the companies that we talk to, they're looking at, parsing it out and making direct comparisons between, where's the best place, if I can compare apples to apples against AWS, that's ultimately what I'd like to do, and that's what they have been able to accomplish, by implementing a DCSM solution. Yeah,
and I'd like to add, we find you can't sell a software deal now today without some type of ROI analysis. There's just no way you're going to sell software without some calculation of benefits. And it really varies across different organizations. Sometimes it's figuring out, well, you can use DCSM to raise the temperature in the data center and reduce your cooling costs. Maybe it's some of our clients have found savings from zombie servers that are running out there, or decommissioned servers that they're still paying service contracts on, or helping people do their jobs more efficiently, so there's reduced time. So typically, OpEx, you can calculate those things, and they tend to be very hard and very easy to get at. CapEx becomes a little more challenging. We have had clients literally defer the purchase of entire data centers because they can manage the data centers that they have more efficiently, or they find out they can do consolidation. So the different use cases vary quite a bit. OpEx tends to be the ones you can go at very crisply because they're very easy to get at, and you have the calculations you can make, while CapEx tends to be a little fuzzier, but tend to have larger numbers involved. So we see both. So the next question, which is sort of related to this, what are the key metrics for DCSM? And I don't have more than that, so I think they're trying to get at what would you be measuring if you're looking at data center service management. Jennifer, did you want to throw anything out there? I certainly have my thoughts.
Okay, yeah, you know what, I think you work with your your own set of customers, and I talk to people, and what I guess, and I've highlighted a little bit of there's people think they should be quantifying on, and they kind of go through some of that. Many times it's the like you mentioned, the savings on the zombie or ghost servers, but the things that kind of pop up, like being able to respond to audits, and instead of paying $15 per device, which when you have thousands of devices and every time you need to do an audit, it was just a hugely expensive endeavor that was time consuming, frustrating. I've found that is one of the key places that people have been able to come back and say, well, we've saved time, we've saved money, it's a win-win, it's a worthwhile investment. It's sometimes things that aren't on their initial checkbox, and that audit capability is one of them.
Okay.
I guess I'll turn it over to you and see, what have you heard in that?
Well, I think it depends on the organization, and we often talk in terms of sort of activities, results, and impact. And what you want to be doing is measuring the impact from a financial perspective, from the amount of time people are spending. And in a lot of ways, some of the benefits of data center service management are just the fact you're beginning to measure these processes. And you mentioned it before, Jennifer. Everyone knows now you can go out and get compute resources, storage resources at AWS, at Azure, at all these different sort of outside sources. And as a result, organizations are starting to ask, well, how much does it cost for us to deliver our services? And so some of the key metrics you want to measure are how much time are you saving of people? You're actually measuring these things so you can now get an idea of how much each business unit is requiring, not only in terms of assets and resources, but how much time is required to take care of their systems. So I think measuring time, measuring costs are sort of key ones you're going to turn to. But then I think you get into number of processes executed, number of changes executed, anything that really has to do with the operational elements of the data center. And then you begin to implement ITIL processes. You begin to measure those processes, but once you make them consistent, you can then measure how long is it taking us to do certain changes, how long is it taking us to do a tech refresh, and you begin to look at how can you improve those different processes. So again, it's very much related to cost, but also just having that transparency and in a way measuring the processes and what different stages take from a time perspective. One of our customers, a large high-tech firm, actually one of the reasons why they implemented data center service management is they want to start charging back the businesses on time that the data center is working. In essence, trying to make the data center less of a cost center and reduce those costs. I wouldn't say make it a profit center, but actually charge back those costs to the different business groups so that they understand the value that's being provided by the data center. And so I think we have time for one more question, and we will get back to everyone who the questions we did not get to, we'll get back to offline. But I think this goes back to an earlier slide you had, Jennifer, which is how can data center service management help compliance and security? What do you mean by that?
Okay, all right. So yeah, that's a good question, and it's again a key because I drew that up in a slide talking about how in the data, how big the problem is, and then I linked that directly to how better management can help. And one of the key things in in being compliant is knowing what you have and where it is, and it's very shocking, really, to me, like how many times people don't have an accurate assessment. So this can be both on the on software compliance. And also, what maintenance do I need to do, and what security measures do I need to take? What patches need to be made? Because I don't know how old this equipment is. And, you know, that if there's people on the phone that don't have those problems, I think that's great. But I talk to many people who just, you know, they're at risk because they don't exactly know what equipment needs to be maintained and when and what are the best practices. And it seems very rudimentary, but it's cropped up so often that I have to think it's a, you know, it's not just the people I talk to, it's a wider audience. And so, you know, things that can help you, you know, drive the best practices. Again, like I said, you know, a lot of times people know, you know, these things need to be updated. I can't, you know, have any missing patches, but you know, if I miss one system and that's a really key system, then I'm exposed. So, you know, having that complete visibility is really the first step in, you know, being able to implement the best practices in management. And
yeah, and I'd like to add, really, compliance and security are sort of two different sides of the same coin, right? Compliance in many ways is just making sure you have the information that when the auditors come, they know you have your act together. And in a lot of ways, a data center service management solution is tracking all these assets, helping you stay on top of everything, and putting really processes and policies that are consistent so that when the auditors come, they see you have your act together, which is 90% of the battle, is that the auditors think you have control of your business at the data center floor. On the security side, it's literally about, typically when we go into clients, they're using spreadsheets, they've hacked together their own tools, they're using, you know, sort of a varied amount of different systems. And so security is all about knowledge. It's all about knowing where things are, knowing what's going on. And so, as Jennifer was mentioning before, knowing where things are, and in the case of Nlight, because we tie into ITSM, into CMDBs, into virtualization, we can tell an organization where an application is running, which virtuals, which physical systems, which systems that physical system is dependent on, is there redundancy on those systems? And so it's that type of control that'll help you sort of harden your systems and just make them more secure, because it's about control and making sure you have sort of your act together, that you know where everything is and you know what's running on those varying systems. And when you're using manual systems, whether it's Visio drawings or spreadsheets, things get out of control very rapidly. So as I said, we'll get to all the questions we did not get to. Again, we hope to see you at AFCOM next week at booth number 519. And again, feel free to download the Data Center Service Management for Dummies ebook. And again, thank you, Jennifer Cook, for joining us from IDC. Thanks for your time. It's been great having you on this particular webinar. And thanks to everybody out there for participating and listening to this webinar. And thanks for all the questions. Again, we'll get to all the ones we did not get to. And that brings us to the conclusion of this particular webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.